Welcome to the Polish Heritage Trust Museum. My name is Ellen Wojciechowski and I'm one of the staff here with myself and Kelly today, and also Kim Allen, who will help us this afternoon with serving afternoon tea. Just to let you know, there's toilets downstairs in the front stairwell, just where you've come through, and also directly above upstairs in the upper gallery. So I'll introduce you to Mr. Lloyd, and he will start proceedings off this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Stefan and Louise from Australia. They're Aussies, but of Polish descent. So today they are not enemies, they're friends. Kresy-Siberia is a very interesting organisation, and they will tell you all about it. We will have opportunity to watch a small film, short film, and then there will be a general discussion. And everyone is welcome to say something, recollection of anything that's happened during this fabulous journey to Siberia. Are you ready to go, Stefan? Because
yes.
I am finished.
Okay.
We may have to share cups because we haven't got enough cups. We've got enough chairs, but not enough cups. So we have to share with your partner coffee, or we can wash them.
Okay. Thank you very much, John, and I'd like to thank John very much for offering us the facility here at the Polish Heritage Trust Museum. Now, John said that I was an Aussie, so who can detect an Aussie accent? No, I'm actually Canadian, so I'm one of the good guys. But the Aussies are good guys too. And as John said, we're all Poles. We're all from Polish heritage and part of the Polonia de Diaspora. And it gives us a great pleasure to be here in New Zealand because New Zealand has a very close connection with the Polish history of Kresy and the Siberian deportations of World War II. And most of you know that, and those who don't, you'll learn a little bit more about it today. I just wanted to ask a question at the beginning. Is there anyone here who doesn't understand English? Może po polsku powinien spytać. Wszyscy rozumieją po polsku? No? Is there anyone who doesn't understand Polish? Okay. So we will continue in English. That's good, because my colleague Louise also doesn't speak Polish very much at all, and neither does Jackie. In fact, what you're seeing here is a presentation about Kresy-Siberia Foundation. You can see our little banner there on the left side, and we've been running for 10 years now. John Roy Wojciechowski is one of our original founding members. 10 years ago now, John, more than 10, at least 10 years ago. And we were set up by really the second generation, together with some first generation and now some third generation following, but really the kids who wanted to understand the history of what their families went through. And I only started getting interested when I was 40 years old or so, and I had children of my own and wanted to tell them about their family history, and found that my father hadn't spoken too much. He was 9 years old when he was deported from Brody. Does anyone know where Brody is? Brody? Brody is a little town that's now in Ukraine, but in 1931, when my father was born, it was in Poland. It was in eastern Poland. And he was deported by the Soviet Union. We'll have a little film that will show a little bit of the history, so I won't say too much except for my personal side. When I started to learn about this, it was from his older brother, who had actually been blinded in Siberia during the war, and his vision never came back. He was blinded from malnutrition and snow blindness. But the amazing thing about that is that he had for someone who was blind, he had a photographic memory, if you know what I mean. He knew every detail, every date, every name of every person. And by the way, there's 4 seats in front if there's anyone who's not sitting. Louise, you can sit in front if you want. Yep, okay. And so my Uncle Mieciu started giving me all the details when I went with my family to visit in England. And I started writing them down, and I said, I better write them down. He's not going to write them, he's blind. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but I was really lucky I could write down some of the details. And then I started to research, of course, so he mentioned some town in Russia and some other town, and I said, well, I wonder what that is. And I went on the internet. This was 10 years ago. We already had, quite a lot of internet things, not as much as today, but already. And I discovered there were other people like me who were trying to find out. They were in Canada, in England, US, New Zealand, South Africa, Mexico, all over the world, and we started corresponding and sharing our discoveries, really. And a lot of people were in the same position. Their family hadn't talked too much about it, or if they did, they were kids and now the parents were died, or Babcha died, and so they said, we wish we would have asked them more about this, but now they're gone and we're trying to figure this out. So some of our members are lucky and they still have their family. I still have my father, and I convinced him to do a 3-hour interview telling his history, so that was good. He wouldn't do it for me, but he did it for one of my colleagues. But many of us don't have that fortune. So the purpose of Kresy-Siberia is to research, because we're trying to find out, to remember, because we're trying to preserve the memories and the experiences for future generations, and also to recognize, especially among non-Polish people who may not understand or never knew about the history of World War II, except for the Nazi side, except for the German side. We know all about that because there's been thousands of movies and everybody knows about Hitler. Stalin, people aren't so sure if he was good or bad, or maybe he was bad and became good, or maybe he was good and became, we don't know. And we always get frustrated when people put up statues to Stalin in the US and things like that, and say, well, he was Uncle Joe. So for us, the recognition part is to, not to pick new fights or anything, it's just so that people understand what the Polish nation has gone through, and especially our families who went through that Eastern Poland side, where it was really the Soviets who took over in partnership with the Germans on the other side. So I won't talk for too much more today, except maybe to introduce Louise. She's going to introduce a short film in a moment. There's a longer version of this film available. It's also available in Polish. But today we're only going to show 17 minutes, which gets the main idea across. It's called Forgotten Odyssey, and I'll let Louise do the rest of the introduction. I think the only other thing I wanted to do today is I've thanked John. I did want to thank Ellen Roy Wojciechowska, who's, Ellen, are you the general manager of the museum, or the boss, basically? So,
the 3 of us work, so there's Marta, Kelly, and myself.
And Marta, Kelly?
She's the chief.
She's the chief. Thank you very much for all your arranging and for preparing and getting our story out and everything. We're so excited to see so many people here. And what you're holding in your hands also, I'll just invite you, if you don't mind, to fill in just the details that you're here, because we'd like to keep you in our communications network with your commission, to send you an email or a letter sometimes. The form will ask you if there's any way that you want to contribute, but even if you don't, leave the rest blank, leave us your name and a way to contact you if you'd like. And it's just telling you a little bit more about our work. So again, thank you very much. And what I might now, Louise, do is ask you to come up. And can I just introduce Barbara as well? Barbara Scrivens. Where are you, Barbara? Right here. Barbara, stand. Thank you. Oh, you are standing. No, sorry. Barbara is one of our long-term members here and has also helped tremendously with the coordination and the organization. And we also have Jackie Zhepka, whose father was an orphan who came to Payatua, and whose grandfather has a virtuti militari, because he fought in World War I, he fought in the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, and he fought in World War II in Monte Cassino. So that's Jackie, and also Jackie's husband, Martin, who's our official photographer today for the occasion, so smile when you see Martin. And we're also filming, just so that you're aware, we're also filming the presentation for those people who weren't able to come. So if there's anybody who objects to being on film, leave now, please. Otherwise, we will continue the presentation. Louise, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'd also like to thank John Roy and Ellen and the team, and Barbara and Jackie for all the help that they've given us in organising this event for us. It's really lovely to be able to finally come to New Zealand and meet everyone. My name's Louise Wojciechowska. I've got some photos that I just wanted Stephen to show, just to introduce a little bit about my family. My family came from the Wolf. That's my dad.
Should you lower the lights a bit?
Yeah,
Is that
maybe just
possible to?
see.
Yeah, just make it a little brighter on the screen.
That's my dad. Hang on, go back before, in the book before the war. Very, very cute looking kid. don't need to go back, Stephen.
Sure.
This is a photo that was taken just, I think, in 1939. We'll go to the next one, Stephen.
Let me just start the slideshow.
There we go. That's Dad. Looking happy. This is a fantastic photo. I love it. That's my dad on the left in his cadet uniform. That's my grandfather on the very right. Stephen, stop it.
I'm not doing anything. It's going by itself, Louise.
Oh, it's
That's
going by
why.
itself. Just ignore it. Anyway, that's my grandfather on the right, and in the middle is my great-grandfather, who would have been in his 90s at that time. The NKVD came and took my grandfather on the right on the 9th of April 1940 from the Wolf after he'd been in hiding because he knew what was coming. And then on the 13th of April they took my father, great-grandfather and my grandmother, who's in the next photo, Stephen, and they took them to that's my dad, a bit later on, to Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. And that's a picture of my grandma in Semipalatinsk, I think taken for formal ID purposes because she was driving trucks and doing other things for the, for goodness sake, for the Russians. Anyway, that's a little bit about my family.
Yep, that's the end. Sorry.
Technical problems. I was born in 1960 in Sydney and knew very, very little about my family history. My dad passed away in 1991, just as he was beginning to talk to me about his past. And my grandma died in 1996. And she certainly wasn't, by the time she died, which was in her mid-90s, she wasn't really capable of telling me very much about her history. But when I was young, my dad did talk a little bit about what happened in Russia to him. I knew nothing about what had happened to my grandfather except that he died in the war and my grandma was a widow. I learned about history at school from the usual textbooks, which, as far as I can recall, and I wish I'd kept a copy of the textbook, said nothing about the Russian invasion. It talked only about Germany. I don't remember anything about the Russians. And certainly I remember watching, I don't know if you ever saw the BBC series World at War. My dad used to watch it religiously. And I remember again a lot about the Germans, and I remember, the scene of the gate being open and the invasion in Germany. Nothing about the Russians, don't remember anything about it. As far as I knew, it never happened. And certainly my school friends never knew it happened, and I remember having an argument with a fellow who's now a judge on the district court in Sydney about the fact that Russia invaded Poland. He was absolutely insistent that it never happened. I got it all wrong. And in fact, my family had been deported by the Nazis. And I go, no. Anyway, that's how much people know. Aneta Nishinska and Yagna Wright were two people who spent 8 years trying to work on the very first documentary about the deportations, and it's the film that I'm about to introduce called The Forgotten Odyssey. They spent 8 years trying to make the film. There was a profound disinterest in them making the film, and in the end they made it with their own money. It was a labour of love. Unfortunately, both of them have passed away, but it was the first documentary of its kind which documents this experience. It was the impetus for the formation of the Kresy-Siberia group, and it was first shown at the Imperial Museum in London back in, I think, was it 2001, Stefan?
2000.
2000. And it was subsequently shown in 2001 in Sydney. Interestingly, there was a journalist called Alex Dundee from Pravda who wrote it up in Moscow and talked about what a profound thing it was to now have this whole thing documented, this piece of history that nobody was prepared to acknowledge. With that, I'd like to introduce The Forgotten Odyssey. We're showing just the short 17-minute version of the film. What we're hoping and what it has proved to be is the start of many people telling their stories, and for families of those who went through this experience, documenting their family's experience for future generations. Stephen?
Okay, and Kelly will do the lights. I think there's a free seat in the front, or 2 free seats in the front. If somebody's standing and would like to sit down. Yes? 2 seats in front. This isn't church, so you're allowed to sit in front. Okay, before I start the movie, just please have a seat. And then please just tell me if you want it louder or quieter, okay?
English friends, they even didn't know that we were deported to Russia.
We didn't want to tell them because they wouldn't understand. They would laugh. So you just close yourself up.
West didn't want to know because the priority was to win the war, regardless of the price. You cannot blame them for that.
It would be fair for the Polish people who suffered so much to say that what was done was very wrong. It's a history, it's important. One shouldn't hide the truth.
The Victory Parade in London. Britain celebrates the end of 6 years of horrific war. Polish soldiers who fought alongside their British and American allies are not invited to take part in the parade.
Victory Parade, Victory Parade, we didn't treat it as a Victory Parade. Of course, I don't even think that we are so much offended that Poles were not invited. At that time I was in Scotland and it was not a victory for us.
Churchill said in the House of Commons, "The fate of Poland seems to be an unending tragedy, and we, who went to war all ill-prepared on her behalf, watch with sorrow the strange outcome of our endeavours." The strange outcome of the war, as Churchill put it, was that Polish troops and their families had no homes to go back to. They had to build up their lives anew, scattered around the world. Over 110,000 people making their home in Britain. However, the reasons for this displacement are known in the West only to a very few. Not many people know that just 5 years earlier, most of the recruits to the Polish army were emaciated, exhausted, and bedraggled. Like General Rakowski, the future hero of the Battle for Monte Cassino. This is the story of their forgotten odyssey. September the 1st, 1939, is known as the day of Hitler's attack on Poland, the day that triggered off the Second World War. The date September the 17th, 1939, is not so well remembered in the West. It was then that Poland suffered another blow. Soviet Russia, her other neighbour, attacked her unexpectedly from the east. This was a direct result of the secret protocol attached to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, in which Germany and Russia divided Poland between themselves, to all intents and purposes, forever. Having occupied half of the Polish territory, the Soviets sought systematically to eliminate the Polish nation. To crush possible resistance, they arrested all the Polish officers they could find, whether serving or in reserve. At one stroke, Stalin was destroying the flower of Polish intelligentsia, professors, scientists, doctors, and artists. The Soviets now turned to the officers' families and the rest of the middle classes, as well as shop owners and landowners. Soon even whole villages were arrested for refusing to accept Soviet citizenship. No one was spared. All were taken and given just half an hour to pack their possessions. Halina Żywuszko was 13.
My sister had flu and they came to take us away. My mother was begging them to let her stay behind. She was worried about her, but the Russians didn't want to hear.
Around 1.7 million inhabitants of eastern Poland, not only Poles but also Jews, Belarusians and Ukrainians, were deported to the depths of Russia, into the unknown. Their only crime, they were Polish citizens. Janina Jorkiewicz, then 13, vividly remembers leaving Poland.
It was only at the station that we saw the full extent of the tragedy of our people. There were several sets of goods trains. Voices, questions and shouts were coming from inside. After some time, the train started and there was a great outpouring of the hymn, "We will not abandon our land," coming from all the trains. Everyone was crying, everyone was singing.
Wszyscy płakali, wszyscy śpiewali.
conditions in the train were inhuman.
Just normal cattle train, 60 to 70 people were pushed into one compartment. Of course, there were no beds. In the middle of that wagon, there was cast iron stove, and that's all what there was. There was no toilet. There was one opening little hole.
10-year-old Janina Kwiatkowska's journey started tragically.
On the way my grandmother died, they threw her out into a ditch, and the train went on.
Several people died because it was very cold. We were given very little food, some fish, and occasionally water. We had to melt the snow.
The Soviets sent Poland's civilian population to work at collective farms and in isolated settlements all over Siberia and northern Kazakhstan. Stefan Weidenfeld's odyssey started when he was 16.
After a week-long journey, we found ourselves in the forest, in the middle of nowhere, guarded by a single Soviet elderly policeman whose name was Borisov, and who guarded us with a rifle hanging on a string from his shoulder. There was no way of escaping, and we all had to work in the forest. We were sent there for re-education in physical work. And this was, of course, a lot of rubbish.
Majority of the people who started working in gold mining pits, in the pit called Yuzhna, where you used to work in water. They supplied you sort of the rubber overalls and gave you, regardless of your age or sex, gave you a glass of very strong vodka before you went there. Conditions were really harsh. I was working in one of those as a 14-year boy, nearly 1,000 feet below the ground. So were the pregnant women, so were my mother.
Through our 2 years in Russia, we had formed a view that the population of the Soviet Union was clearly divided into the ruled and the rulers, and that the rulers led entirely different lives from the enormous, much greater part of the population who were the ruled and whose lives were miserable and difficult. And among them we found very many normal, pleasant, compassionate people.
On June the 22nd, 1941, Hitler unexpectedly attacked the Soviet Union. Paradoxically, it was the moment which brought deliverance to thousands of Poles incarcerated all over the country. Following Churchill's advice, General Sikorski, Prime Minister of the Polish government, now based in London, signed a treaty with the Soviets, as a result of which Stalin agreed to an amnesty, a pardon for the Poles who were allowed to form an army. It was to join the fight against Hitler, now the common enemy. Leaving behind their places of confinement was by no means the end of their misfortunes. Janina's tragedy struck on her way south, to freedom.
W pewnym momencie pociąg w nocy, późnym wieczorem zatrzymuje się.
Suddenly, at night, the train stopped in the snowdrifts. And it turns out that, according to the train driver, the engine is broken and we have to wait all night. Around us is only snow. The temperature is -40 degrees. And in the distance you could see the lights of a small village. The people were hungry and desperate. So they decided to go to that village to get some food. My mother was among them. When they were walking up to the waist in snow, the train suddenly started. There was great despair. the children cried, and I realized that this might be the last time I saw my mother. And that's what happened. I never saw her again. And I understood that I became the only person at the age of 13 who would take care of my brothers.
Their odyssey went on relentlessly. Exhausted, bedraggled and lice-ridden, hundreds of thousands of those released from the camps and settlements were making their way from the remotest corners of Russia, determined to find their army. But the further south they came, the more they were struck by terrible epidemics, typhus, dysentery and malaria. Many thousands were buried by the roadside. The main army reception center for recruits was Buzawuk. Those lucky enough to reach it alive started intensive training. General Władysław Anders, himself recently released from a 2-year stay in Soviet prisons, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Polish army. These new soldiers had to be clothed, trained, and most immediately fed. Although the Soviet troop rations were inadequate, General Anders gave orders that they were to be shared amongst the masses of starving civilians. For women, children, and old people, finding their army became the only hope for survival. Then in 1942, General Anders persuaded Churchill to obtain Stalin's permission to let the Polish army leave the Soviet Union. Along with the troops, a number of soldiers' families were allowed out. By August 1942, 118,000 troops and 44,000 civilians had left the Soviet Union in 3 large convoys, to freedom, to Persia. They crossed the Caspian Sea in overcrowded Soviet tankers. But not everyone was lucky enough to enjoy the fruits of the amnesty. Thousands of Poles remained stranded in the Soviet Union. Some were simply not released from camps and settlements. Many others were dealt further blows when freedom was only an arm's length away.
They let out a few families, amongst them me and my mother, only in November. We were going by an open lorry through a terrible snowstorm to Pawłodar, 225 kilometers. It was terribly cold, winter, blizzards. We reached Pawłodar and learned that they were no longer taking people into the Polish army, and we were left with no means to live, completely broken.
Following the Soviet amnesty, the Polish authorities carried out a census, which located only 1/3 of the estimated 1.7 million deportees. What was also strange and worrying was that not one of the 22,000 officers arrested in 1939 could be found. In April 1943, the advancing Germans announced the discovery of a mass grave in the Katyn forest near Smolensk. 5,000 bodies found in a ditch were missing officers, shot in the back of the head, their hands bound with wire, lying in layer beyond layer beneath the earth. The Soviets were outraged at Poland's request for an independent investigation by the International Red Cross. Accusing the Poles of aiding Goebbels' propaganda, Stalin broke off diplomatic relations with Poland. From now on, Poland's fate was in the hands of her British and American allies. But it was a delicate matter. The Soviets were now a new, badly needed ally of the West, and they could not be antagonized. Sir Owen O'Malley, the British ambassador to the Polish government, convinced Churchill and the Foreign Office that the responsibility for the Katyn massacre lay with the Soviets. And yet, despite the convincing evidence presented in his secret report, it was decided to bury the issue, for all intents and purposes, forever. Eden told the cabinet, "I did my best to persuade the Poles to treat the Katyn issue as German propaganda against the Allied war effort."
There can be no doubt at all that during the war, a number of people in the highest political circles in the United Kingdom were fully aware of the facts about Katyn and the Soviet deportations and other horrors. And a decision was made deliberately to mislead the public about those things. I think it's very difficult for people after 50 or 60 years to say, not that I made a mistake, but that our government was covering up the essential facts of history.
The odyssey of the Polish wanderers continued. They scattered all over the world in search of a new home. Over 110,000 Poles settled in Britain. Some spent their lives pining away for the green pastures of their childhood. Most, though, have become part of the fabric of British society. But even now, over 60 years on, their tragic memories are not acknowledged, their pain still unresolved. Out of necessity, they have had to reconcile themselves with their unacknowledged past.
No, didn't get any conversation, any sorry notes or apologies. I'm happy, I'm alive, I value my life, and I'm here to tell the story.
Just in case you didn't know, Professor Norman Davis is here in Auckland on Friday 11th at the Auckland University at 3 o'clock. If anyone interested, he wrote the true history of Poland, and after we regained independence, it was the book that was used in Poland because previous history books were falsified by the then Russian government in Poland. So he's here talking at the university at 3 o'clock. If anybody wants to go, let me know, and I'll tell you how to get there. Sorry.
Thanks, John. And I'm told by the Melbourne people who saw him a couple of weeks ago that he was absolutely extraordinary, that he's really worth going to see.
So, the way that, well, first of all, we're overwhelmed by how many people have come. I don't think we expected quite this many people. So, we've got a second shift, boiling water for coffee and tea, and I think
you have to share your mug.
Share your mug with a friend or make a new friend. So, I think what we're going to do, though, is go for maybe another 15 or 20 minutes and then have a tea break at 3 o'clock. Yeah, so that we'll take this next little period to just have a little bit of a discussion, any questions or answers, and then we'll have a tea break, and then after the tea break, I'd like to show you the Kresy-Siberia Virtual Museum, which is a museum that we're building on the internet to commemorate this history and to spread and promote this history all around the world, in Polish and in English, and which is actually the main reason Louise and I have come here from Australia, is to meet with you all, but also to ask you for your help and participation in this. And I'll just give a slight advance hint. There's a very special room in the museum that we're building, which is only for New Zealand. It's the New Zealand room, Kaiatua room. We have one for Mexico, we have one for India, we have one for Africa, but there's a special one for New Zealand, and we're not going to do it. It has to be the New Zealand people who do it. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about all of that after the tea break. I think what I want to do just before, just to start, to move from the film now, is to ask in this group of 70 people or so, maybe 75, how many of you remember, because you were part of this history during World War II? Can I ask you to just raise your hands, or can I ask you actually to stand up for a moment so we can acknowledge you?
All the grey hairs.
Speak for yourself, John. You know, we've done this presentation now in Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, of course, in New York, Chicago, London. I was just in Los Angeles yesterday, San Francisco the day before that, and in Montreal. And this is the largest turnout that we've had, and also the most number of survivors. I counted 8 maybe stood up. Were there 8 who stood up, something like this? 11? Someone was counting? Now, I'd like to ask the next generation, or if you have a family member, an uncle, an aunt, or a parent or grandparent who's gone through this, if you could please stand up so we know how many are in the families. I'm already standing. So, okay. Well, today we had, I think, a representative of the survivors, but also a representative of the next generation, who had kindly agreed to perhaps say a few words, not to tell you anything about their history because it's different than yours or anything, but just maybe for some of the people who haven't really heard that much about this history. That's why we're doing this. It's because we're trying to make it more widely known. And Barbara and Aniela, if you wouldn't mind perhaps just...
Hang on a second, but Aniela was there.
I'm sorry?
So I would be as a survivor.
She's a survivor.
But
Yes.
I didn't know I was going to...
I know you weren't asked to prepare a speech or anything, but I think just you're a member of the Kresy-Siberia group and have been for a long time, and Barbara as
Yes,
well.
I have been for 10 years almost, right from the beginning.
Yes, and perhaps if you just maybe could say, well, if you could come to the microphone so people can hear, and just say a few words, and then Barbara, if you could. And if anybody here would like to ask them any... Oh, yes. Okay.
I did tell Aniela we were going to be sitting on chairs. And
Yes, you did. That's why
So is it all right if we just bring the chairs up? We'll just bring a chair up. And, do you want to do it that way?
No, that's okay. I can stand. I won't be long because you have lots of other people. I was only...
Just maybe come to the
Oh my gosh, no.
Just so people can hear you. Just so people can hear you.
Okay.
It's not hard anymore.
You can hear me.
You're amongst friends.
Okay, thank you. Dziękuję. Can everybody hear me? I'm sorry, I did not prepare because
No, because I didn't ask you to. I didn't ask you to prepare.
I thought it was going to be like 5 or 6 people sitting around the
So
table.
you're going to do it that way.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was only 4 years old, and of course went through like everybody else.
Microphone, please.
I lost my father in Uzbekistan. We don't know what happened to him. Like one of the ladies in here, he went to the hospital, and we never saw him again. I lost a baby brother in Iran, and at least we can go and visit his grave. But I would like to ask you, where do I belong? Because you said the Mexico people, the New Zealand people, the African people from Africa, and I've been everywhere. From Uzbekistan, we went to Iran, like everybody else. Then we went to Karachi. We were there for a few months. Then we spent 7 years in Africa, in Uganda, in a camp called Koya. From then we went to England to join my uncles, because there were 7 uncles who fought, and one of them was killed in the mountains in a beautiful young man. And we were there for 2 years. Then we went to Argentina to join another uncle, where we lived for 11 years. Then I went to the States, and after 6 or 7 years, I met my future husband in San Francisco, and that's how I ended up in New Zealand. Because he's English, but he lived in New Zealand, and that's how I ended up. I'm not from Paketua, but I have been here 44 years. So where do I belong?
Everywhere.
And what I wanted basically for you, I brought something in here. This is all the information I gathered by belonging to Kresy-Siberia. If it weren't through them, and all the others, they were so helpful. and they really guided me through and told me where to get. I remembered a few names that my mother mentioned, Sagainova or Suzuk or things like that. Amazing the memory that the people have. I am amazed at the Polish people, how they remember all the details. And putting it all together, these are all the information. So it is worth joining the group because you don't really know what you will get. This is my whole history. It's amazing. And another thing also I've got in here, I might put it on the table if you are interested. In 2008, I went to Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Iran and tried to somehow find something about my father. There is a Polish community in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, but absolutely no record because he was a civilian. He tried to join the army, but he was too sick and he wasn't accepted, and that's why we lost him. And then I went to Turkmenistan, and just going in a train through the desert, it was really brought some memories. And in Tehran, I went to visit the grave because there's a great big cemetery of almost 2,000 Polish people, and I found my baby brother's grave. And also I went to Isfahan, and the little chapel is still there, and there are two nuns that are looking after it, and you will find it in here if you want to have a look at the photos. So I'll put that on the back table. And in 2010 I went back to Poland and to Ukraine. There was a 9-hour wait to cross the border, but it was all worth it because we found people that remembered my family, and my house is still standing. And I found some relatives. So thank you very much for listening.
Do we put them up to make so people can have a look? I've got a folder that's a bit like that. It's now 2 things and exercising the stuff I've found. It's just phenomenal.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. Now, Barbara, I know I didn't ask you to prepare a speech or anything either. So this is just sharing of, your experience as perhaps a child from someone who was confused. But you also have to come.
But I know.
But you also have to come to the microphone.
I will. I had a feeling, and because I stutter, I've written things down. I'm a better writer than a talker.
And if there's anybody else who would like to talk about their experience or their history or just make any statements or comments, maybe after Basha has had a chance to talk, then we can ask, have that conversation. Barbara?
Hi. Hi.
The microphone's not working.
Oh, it's okay. Microphone. I haven't been through any of this, obviously.
It's not working.
But I have, and I hope I won't bore the older of you because I haven't, and I'm just a kid. Anyway, I wrote something down, and when I was thinking about this, and Louise said, would you mind being on a panel? I said, would you mind being on a panel? And I thought, well, okay, if there's nobody else. And I thought, just in case. So I was in the supermarket yesterday. Actually, it was Thursday because yesterday was when I wrote this. And I met a woman I hadn't seen for ages. We got chatting because I talk a lot. And I said I'd come in just to get a few things for today's meeting. And we talked about Kresy, and she was surprised I was Polish. And I said, yeah, I'm Polish. And she's Ukrainian, Italian. And I didn't know she was Ukrainian, Italian. She didn't know I was Polish. she said, I didn't know anything about the war. All I knew was that my father was a POW and he never talked about it. And I think that's the whole thing with us as a second generation, isn't it? The thing about parents, I've thought about this quite a lot, is that they want to shield their children from the cruelties of life. I know I would do anything like that for my kids. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. It often depends on the age of the child and the family dynamics. Survivors here saw and had to cope with experiences of cruelty and deprivation way beyond their years. That's completely understandable why so many didn't talk about their experiences. For a start, they weren't believed. There was no trauma counselling, and they simply got on with life. Neither my parents nor my uncles nor my grandmothers talked to us girls about what they'd gone through. As I grew older, I was wondering whether the story about a farm in Poland was just a story, you know? Why did my grandfathers have to die? One in Italy, one in France. When my husband's English grandfathers didn't. They were the same ages, they also had families. It was as if a Polish life was not worth anything. I was told I was bitter and cut off those thoughts, as one does. I've written fitting in pink. One of my earliest memories is a playground. I had just started school. My mum had dropped me off and had taken my three sisters home in a pram. I looked around and it was like a babble. I couldn't understand a word they said. On the plus side, I developed a jolly good memory. There was no parental help with reading, so I had to learn my books off by heart. I adapted quickly, as children do. You know, 5-year-old, school. I had no idea we were different. I had no idea my parents spoke funny. I had no idea I had a funny surname. Until I reached a certain age. And that's the age of children. You can tell I'm a bit of a psychologist. It's when children start to be judgmental. It's when they start to absorb what others are saying. And I'm sure it happened in England, in the part of England where I lived. One of the first English words I understood, which were not part of school reading, was the word foreigner. At first I thought it was because I was born in St Albans and we were living in Dunstable. It took me a while to realise that although I was born close to Tom, Dick or Harry, I was a foreigner. Children overheard my mom call me Bash. They couldn't pronounce Yes John, but they had a good time with Bash. Bash. I'll bash you in a minute, I used to say. Sticking up for myself was never a problem. I was a foreigner in England. I did not quite belong in South Africa. And I've got here, even though the nuns got my low class English accent out of me. And now every time I open my mouth in New Zealand, it's obvious I'm an outsider. Bitter. You don't want to be a young woman with that over your head, or a young mum. I became whatever I needed to be. Polishness is easy to hide when you're in South Africa. There isn't a huge Polish network like in England. When we immigrated here in 1998, I asked my mum to write me down my Bapchas and Jadek's names, birthplaces and where they come from. This is because I'm also an old journalist. I just wanted it, just in case. Had that piece of paper for 9 years. We aren't a very close family. Communication was never great. I'd hear from my mom maybe once a year. So when I found a brown envelope in the post box, you know when you think, oh God, and your heart starts pumping. It was 3 pages, and my mom, as she does, wrote 3 lines. And she wrote, "This is my story as well, from 10 to 1940, with an LM, that means love mum, and a heart." She actually got the spelling right, which is quite good. Also, usually it should say OLSO. It was a poem by Tolek Sobierajski, Red Night. I read the first 2 stanzas and had to put it down. I wanted to know more, but at the same time I didn't. I couldn't touch it. It lay open for weeks before I plucked up the courage to finish it. May I just read those 2 stanzas? And at first, I thought to myself afterwards, what an absolute prejudicial bigot you are to think that you didn't believe that this was written by a Pole. Because to me the English was just so pertinent. Much time has passed, we are still in pain. So much advice, but all in vain. I must speak more before no one remains to shout and accuse of crimes and chains. Put on my people by a ruthless regime to work and die for tyrants' false dream. To those left behind, words are said. If for a minute they think we forget the hurt, the sorrow embedded so deep, no time can cure, but often we weep. Large tears of ice frozen in space, with moments of terror seen on a face. Of each that suffered unforgettable fear, 19 and 40 that fateful year. February the 10th was that very date, the hour unknown, but always late. They came in darkness like shadow or ghost, feared and unwanted, hated by most. Yet here they were, outside our doors, thumping and howling, threatening force. The knocks were made by rifles' butts, carried by soldiers wearing peaked hats, pulled down to cover most of the head, only stars showing, coloured bright red. With hammer and sickle the badge is known well, to millions of people meant life in hell. Most frightening weapon in the dim light was long, thin bayonet, 1 yard in height. Fixed to the rifle was ready to use, and fight or combat many would lose. The coats were long, made out of furs, mounted on horses, looked like brown bears. I loved his last lines that say, "Till retribution on God's judgment day, I'm often told, let past be dead. I did try, but then I kneel by my bed and pray in silence for the one and all. God, in your mercy, show none on his soul." May he never rest.
Basha, you've amazed us all. We had no expectation that you would bring so much. Thank you very much. Can I just ask, in the audience here, we're almost ready for our break, and Ellen's been waving and saying tea. I think that means tea time. I'm not sure in New Zealand. Or toilet time. Now, I will permit you to take a break if you promise to come back. Because when you stand up, we're going to move the chairs, I think. Is that right, Ellen?
I think that'll be the safest thing. If we kind of like, for the men, just if you could stack up maybe 10 stacks of chairs in the centre here, and then everyone else can have a walk around, you feel a bit more free. Because if you just get your cup of tea, I won't be able to pass it to you. So some of the burly blokes, just 10 stacks in the centre, and then 10 coffee served and juice on this side here.
Yes, and then when we gather back together, should we say 3:15, 15 minutes enough, or 20 minutes?
Yeah, it'll probably take us half an hour.
Half an hour, so we'll reconvene at 3:30. But let's make it 3:30. We don't want to keep you late tonight. And then we'll continue with perhaps hearing from some other people, and I'll tell you about the Kresy-Siberia Museum. Okay, so we take a little tea break.
I can see it.
Christina Brooks. Who belonged to the Kresy, you know, we've got yeah, but we were thinking around
Well, yeah,
Let's get going, let's move the game along.
Yeah, because that's quite different to this, what we don't. I actually want to talk to someone to find out, because there's obviously two branches of the tragic story. There's Mum's branch and then there's this branch.
Baby shaver. That's one that I found
No, there's plenty of cups. But the Kresy-Siberia also mentioned Kahiatua, but it was Mum's group that came to Kahiatua, and they had quite a different journey from Poland No, you see, Mum's from the other branch that we didn't go You're bloody lucky you didn't go to Siberia. But you went voluntarily. You weren't voted on another train. So they did. You and Auntie Barbara decided to wait to go in Russia. I did in Russia. So my grandmother and she Excuse me, Bruce. I knew she'd been one of those.
That was my favorite memory. That is under one. So you're going to find out where it is, and you're going to go there to get some food. This is where the children
Is that yours? Oh, good. Now we got it. Thank you.
And they like they want to and just
Does anybody need to borrow a pen to fill in one of these
Is the website on You don't want to know.
Yes. Thank you for that note. But I can't get this one now because it's been on before. No, I'm just going to try one of those. Although the it's probably cleaner than the outside. We started
Have you met her?
I got her as well. She's following me out.
Why didn't Kenya come?
She's a grandmother.
He mentioned Darren's been
5-minute warning if you need to go to the toilet, go now.
I'm going to pop back there. Just do it. Just got I'll talk to you about it. Yeah, I'll watch it for you. Please do. Very good.
Four-minute warning. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
One of your rights for history.
How many have we got this? It's all sorted out now. It's all sorted now. Right at the See? I know more about this cousin than you do. Well, I don't.
So when you least a warm and one tight.
Excuse me, girls, I want to get started. Here we go.
That's nice.
Now, where's my cheddar box?
Well, there's a few people who aren't back, or maybe they're not coming back.
Change.
Come over this way without the blue.
Yeah, I must have said that.
Okay. Now, there are lots of seats, 3 now, if you want to sit. I might move this.
While Stefan getting organized, I've got forms here for Siberian Cross. This one, if anybody has not received cross, you're still entitled to it, and I will help you complete your
Okay. Well, I think we might start, if that's all right. If there's anybody who's standing, there's lots of chairs here in the front if you'd like to sit down. And then you won't be too bored, or at least if you fall asleep, you won't fall down if you're sitting on these chairs. Now, I'm not sure if that's 100% in focus. Louise, could you just do that a little bit better? My eyes are getting old, but I think maybe it could be focused. Ah, better. Okay, thank you. And I have here a little clicker, which I hope will help me to move the slides forward, but if it doesn't, then Louise will help me with that as well. Well, first of all, before I start talking about the museum, is there anybody who wanted to just say anything or ask a question or make a greeting or say if their story was a little bit differently or anything like this?
5 minutes.
Yes, can we have the lights? Can we have the lights on so John can speak here? John, would you like the microphone at the stand?
Lovely.
I won't be. Just in case you missed the point about the Polish army and the victory parade. Polish army was the second largest army next to British army before the Americans came in. And the reason why they were not invited is Stalin asked Churchill not to invite them. And these boys, especially the pilots from 303 Squadron, they cried when they were not invited to participate in the victory parade. I've got an article from London Illustrated, if anybody's interested, describing it. There were 17 nations were invited, but Poland wasn't, because Stalin wanted his victory parade, which he held in Moscow later. It's very important. We had 450,000 soldiers, airmen, and Navy personnel in the Allied Army, second only to British. It's important to remember these things, because we contributed a lot. Thanks.
Thanks. Somebody told me that I can't walk too close to that speaker. Is that right? Okay. Leave the light for a moment. Just leave the light, because I know that there's a lot of people here who are either survivors themselves, in other words, they lived through this and they're here with us, or are the children or also grandchildren, whoever's calling that is. It's gone. Throw it in the toilet next time, thanks. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to just say hello, or just say maybe their history was a little bit different, or say anything else, or ask a question, or talk about their children, or anything, or somebody in their family who perhaps didn't survive through the war? Yes, would you mind coming up and just tell us your name? And yes.
I'm Patricia, and my mother was Adela Yashinovich, one of the children from Paya to a Polish camp. She was 12 when she was taken, and I remember she must have done her therapy on us, because when we were children at night, she'd be telling us the stories, and we'd be listening to the stories, and we'd go to sleep, and the tears would be streaming down our faces, and Mum would be crying too. So she wanted to, I guess, tell us what had happened and the trauma it had caused, and I guess it was her way of knowing that someone was listening to what she'd been through. And more recently, we sat down, my two other sisters, Sonia and Bron, sat down with her, and we have recorded her story. So it's really great that now our children, my children and my grandchildren, know the story, and we're really proud to be able to pass that on. And I see the little book upstairs, Stefania's Dancing Slippers, and I think it's just great that the young ones can learn some of the story as well. And I was talking to another lady, I forget where she is, she was here, she was saying she blocked everything out, when she blocked a lot of things out when she was deported. She was only 6, and I said to Mum, how come this hasn't affected you? And she said, it's really like a dream. But I think what happened was she did repress a lot of the awful trauma of it. But when her stepmother died, Stefania, she got such a shock. It must have brought back all the deaths she'd experienced, and she actually lost her voice and couldn't speak for 12 hours. She had no memory. And I think there is that traumatic part that she carries with her, but she's done remarkably well. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
And I'm Patricia's sister, and I just want to, Sonia, and I just want to thank all those of you who've experienced the Siberian trauma, and I want to thank you for the perseverance, the faith that you've shown, because I said to Mum, what helped you through? And she said it was her faith in God. And that's really powerful for me. And I teach at a Catholic school now, and we're able to bring those experiences to our children, and just to hold you up as examples of what you can do in your faith. So I just want to thank you very much.
I am one of those children from Bahia Tour camp, and I would like to say thank you to New Zealand people, how wonderful they were to us, and we're very, very grateful that they looked after us and brought us up the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisha. Marisha, what is your last name?
Kołodzińska.
Marisha Kołodzińska. Thank you very much. Now, David, I see that you're sitting over there. I was going to ask you to just come up and say something from the New Zealand people, as Marisha is just thanking the New Zealand people, and tell us a little bit like you were telling me at the coffee break. Tell us your name as well, so we know who you are.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm David Chandler. My wife Janice is here. We do not have Polish ancestry, but I said to Stefan that there are a large number of New Zealanders who know about the war who know about the Polish people and the suffering, and who give Polish people a large degree of support. Janice went to school with Polish children. Their heads were shaved. They wore knickerbockers. And yes, they were the attraction of the class. I went to school also with Polish children. I went to university with a very fine Polish man, Adam Zak, who had a brother here. And Adam went on to become a professor of aeronautical engineering in one of the American universities. My wife and I have had the privilege of travelling through Poland. I won't attempt to pronounce the names of the cities and the areas that we went through. Some of them were very sobering experiences. We also have travelled through Uzbekistan and Iran and India, and we have seen where the Polish children were taken. We have had some interaction with some of the Polish people here. We have rented houses from them, and I just wanted the Polish people here to know that they had a great deal of support from a lot of New Zealanders. The book published on the Paya Tua children was very helpful. I think that was a very good book that helped spread the message. And I'll just conclude by saying that the knowledge of the events which we have seen today is well known amongst a large number of New Zealanders, particularly those of my age. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, David. And I didn't ask you to say any of that in Polish, but that's all. Oh, yes, another. Would you like to perhaps just, I'm not sure how far this microphone will reach, but I think it would be good if you could.
I'll speak with you. My name's Murray. I'm a New Zealander. Just last year, or about 18 months ago, I heard about this outfit here. So I came along and I've seen some of the photo movies, and I just didn't really realise how Poland was squeezed from both sides. But now I can understand. But I think, I know in the Second World War, all the Allies, they owed a tremendous debt to the Polish encryptonologists who saw that Nazis fellow.
The Enigma
machine. That really was a big thing in changing the whole outcome of the war. But nice to have met you all. But it was very interesting. So I've got quite a warm empathy to you all.
Thank you, Murray. Oh, Marisha, yes, just a moment.
I met one of the guys that used to come to the Polish camp. And when he saw me, he says, "Are you from the camp?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Those are the nicest people that ever came to New Zealand."
Have you married him? No! Kelly, could you pass me a couple of the brochure and the form? So I'll be using those in a minute. Okay, would anybody else like to say anything or anything else? Okay. There'll be a chance later if something comes to your mind as you're talking. What I'd like to do now is show you the museum, I think. Because, okay, let me just see if I can make this come back on the screen here. 6, maybe this one. Ah, it's wonderful when these things work the way they're supposed to. Louise, if you need to move it forward, just click on that left-hand button. I feel like one of those talk show hosts or something walking around with the microphone with the MC. Well, the first thing actually I wanted to just tell you about the Kresy-Siberia. While we have it up here, can everybody see this symbol here? Does anyone have an idea what it means? What is it? Why does it look like this? Any volunteers? Yes.
Russia, Germany.
Yes, that's exactly 100% right. This Polish eagle with a crown, white eagle on a red shield, is the symbol of Poland, of course. And it's actually, this is the shield from the Second Republic of Poland, which was born in 1919, 1920, by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. So Murray, this might be more for you. Other people may know the history, but for 130 years, Poland was not existing as a country. The Polish people were there, but it was divided between Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. And there was no Poland. And it was Polish people were very patriotic, even though their language and their religion were, under attack effectively, especially in the German. I heard some of the people singing the Rota before. Do 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 nowy, Polski naród, polski lud, królewskie sierda stworzy, nienawidny ma zgłębi brud, tak nam dopomóż Bóg, tak nam dopomóż Bóg. Thank you for singing this. It's a very stirring Polish hymn, and it was actually, somebody will know who wrote it, but I know it's called Dorota, and it was actually as a protest song by the Polish that they will not allow their language to be stamped out. And in that case, I believe it was against the Germans who were Germanizing part of the words that go through. Polish people are very romantic and patriotic people. We know that that's the case. Very strong patriots. So it was in 1919 that the Treaty of Versailles created Poland. So this came back. Basha.
Please don't interrupt. And I'm sorry. I've been reading, Norman Davies.
Would you like to come up just so everyone can hear?
I've been researching, and I've been reading Norman Davies' book, God's Playground. He wrote it in about 1979, and it is very difficult to read, loads of names of things. But what he did say, was that the Treaty of Versailles didn't actually create Poland. A few days before that, it's not me, that's Norman Davies. It was a void because the Austrian-Hungarian Republic they just disappeared, and everybody there was nobody left in Poland. They just went.
The authorities, you mean?
Yeah, and so what the Treaty of Versailles did was underline the Polish Republic. So just in case you think that they're nice people, they gave Poland.
I guess the point Basha is making is an important one, is that these empires were fighting amongst each other and they really exhausted each other. In fact, in Russia, there was the revolution, and then they exited the war, and the Austrian Empire collapsed. And, so Poland was a new country. Well, it was an old country, 1,000 years old, but it was also newly reforming from these three different empires that for 5-6 generations, think about 130 years, they didn't have Polish people weren't running their own country. So it was a time of great excitement, patriotism, but also a lot of challenges. Now, this is the country, and I asked about just the shield. In 1939, if this was Poland, you can imagine this was the Germans came on this side, and the Soviets came on this side. And this is the border that after the war, unfortunately for people like in my family, the part on the east, on the right-hand side, stayed in the Soviet Union. So if you want to think of it this way, Stalin got to keep his prize from invading Poland in 1939. The Germans lost a lot because they actually lost lands that they had. Over the centuries they went back and forth, but before the war, places like Wrocław and Szczecin and Gdańsk were German lands, and those lands were lost. So when we show this, I think my pocket is probably pressing the buttons here because I'm not. Are you pressing the buttons?
No, I'm not touching it.
Okay, because we've skipped way ahead. We'll just go back here, just if you permit me to escape. Okay, and Louise, if you can just, oh sorry, we'll run back up to here. I think, up. Okay, if we click up a few times. Sorry. Okay, we wanted to run up. Here, click. Back to here. There. And we want to turn the slideshow, which means there. And this one. Okay. Thank you for your patience. The technology is wonderful, except when it takes over. So much for the introduction maybe then, and we'll just sort of start talking about the museum itself now that we've explained the logo, because the logo is the gray part no longer exists as part of Poland. It only exists in our memory. And the purpose of this museum is to preserve this memory for the future, especially when the generation that lived through this war in these times is no longer with us. Okay, because especially here in New Zealand, the people who came were children during the war. Now, they're, what, 70s, 80s, maybe a little bit older. My father's 82. So we know that it's our last chance, in a way, to gather this history and put it together and take it to the world. I think the other thing about this museum is people say, where is this museum? I think, you know, it would be nice to visit it. So next time we go, is it in Poland or in Australia? Where are you building this museum? We're actually building it everywhere on the globe, on the internet. So the only address you need to know is www.Kresy-Siberia.org. And all of the little brochures that you have this address on there, in case you're wondering. And the reason we put it on the internet is because this way the museum can actually go to the people. People don't have to go to the museum. It goes into every house that has a computer anywhere around the world. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions of computers now around the world. The internet is everywhere in all the classrooms and all the universities, all libraries. People can visit this. And we do it in Polish and in English, because it's important for the people in Poland also to get this history. For 50 years they were still under the Soviet and communist dictatorship, and this history was not permitted to be spoken about. So as we sort of go through this museum, you can see it's organized into 12 parts. I'm going to really talk about 4 parts mostly here today, because they tell the key elements. But we're gathering survivor testimonies. We have a wall of names which commemorates all the people who went through the experience, whether they survived or if they died. We acknowledge our museum supporters, because we have not only individuals, also government and Polonia organizations are supporting this, because we're very much trying to pull together all of the resources and present them in one place on the internet. We're not inventing anything so much, but we're gathering and we're presenting it. I'll talk a bit more about the museum galleries, which are specific exhibits around each. Well, I mentioned we want a gallery about New Zealand, so it gives you an idea. There's a theme or a certain episode of the war, the Battle of Britain, Katyń. These are the galleries. News and information. Okay, well that's just what's the latest. The museum entrance hall you have here, it's just coming in. Special exhibitions. From time to time somebody finds something special. For example, there's an exhibition about pamiętniki. Did anyone here do a pamiętnik when they were children? Yes, Aniela? All of you? It's like a souvenir book, scrapbook, autograph book, where people do drawings and write poems for you, and it's a souvenir of the time. So we have a special exhibition with the souvenirs from the children. So we put that in the special exhibition area. We have a chapel, or actually more than one chapel, because we have a Catholic as well as a Jewish chaplain of the museum. Is Jeff still here? Jeff? Nobody here is responding to the name Jeff. There was a gentleman here, Jeff, for the first part, who came and asked me, do you have any information about Jewish people? Because my family was Jewish, they went through this. And our museum is for all Polish citizens of the Republic of Poland between the war. They were Polish, they were Jewish, they were Ukrainian, there were some German, there were some Lithuanians, some Belarusians, Armenians, Tatars, because Poland was like a multinational country, especially in the east, which had this whole mixing pot of people. So we have a chaplain who's Catholic, who's Father Ojciec Lucjan Królikowski. Has anyone heard of Ojciec Lucjan? Yes? Ojciec Lucjan wrote, well, do you want to say just one word about this book, John?
He wrote a book called The Stolen Childhood. We have a copy here in the museum, and I have copies. If you haven't got it in your library, worthwhile. He's a great writer.
And Father Królikowski, sorry, I'll show you a picture of Father Królikowski later. He was a young priest, a young seminarian, who was deported to Siberia, ended up in Africa, and was taking care of some orphans that after the war the communist government wanted to have returned to Poland. They said, these are Polish children, and he said, no way. We're not sending these children back to the communists. And he managed to, they were hiding, and he managed to arrange with the Catholic bishop in Montreal for these children to be transported to Montreal. And so the same way as there's the Payatua children, there are Father Królikowski's children who all went to Montreal, Canada, and then they're living all over the world now. So he's our chaplain. He's 92 years old and still surviving in Chicopee, Massachusetts. We have a museum shop. Now, Louise, just beside you there is a sweatshirt.
Oh, yes.
Which I'd like you to hold up. And Kelly, can you turn on the light for one moment? Now, if you've ever been to a museum, I don't know, John, about you have a little bookstore, you can sell books and things here?
Yes.
Every museum has a shop. So our internet museum you can visit, and you can buy, well, you can buy books, first of all, on the internet, we'll mail them to you. Or you can buy a shirt, or a hat. No, not recently. Or a coffee cup, or a beer mug. Now, the reason I'm talking about the shop is not because it's like we want this whole story to be like Disneyland or anything, but it's actually because when I wear that, people look at it and they say, has that happened to you, Louise?
Yes, they do. You walk around the street and you kind of forget you're wearing a shirt and people ask you stuff. What's that? Oh, and there's some connection. It's amazing what you find out. Or somehow
So there's a chance to tell your story. And also, I think that one sells for $35, but $10 goes to Kresy-Siberia Foundation to support building more of this museum. So anyway, that's the little advertising. We have a museum shop. We can turn off the, you look good in that, Louise. We have 3 more sections. A reference section, which has links to research. I think Aniela was talking about all the research that she did with the Kresy-Siberia group helping her. We're capturing all of these links here in the reference center, so if you want to do some family research or history research. We have a Hall of Memories, which I'll talk about a bit more. It's like a collection of, a scrapbook of photographs and albums. And then the museum visitors room is where you walk into the Kresy-Siberia discussion group, where you have over 1,000 members around the world in 25 countries. Some old, some new. John's in the group, Basha's in the group, Louise, of course, and Jackie, and Aniela, you said you were one of the first to join, and I think that's right, in 2001. And I've probably forgotten a couple of other people here who signed up to this discussion group. And you can come in, Kelly is in, and you can come in and ask any questions you want, or offer information if you have information. And it's amazing how sometimes we have families find each other after 50 years. They didn't even know the cousin was alive, or they find a family in Poland they didn't know existed. They go and they visit them, and it's a very emotional time of coming back together. So that's in the museum visitors room. Now, I'll see if I can tell you about 4 sections. The museum gallery, the wall of names, the hall of memories, and the survivor testimonies, because this is what we're here to ask for your help in contributing. So Louise, can we just advance? First, you're about to start to hear.
Congratulations on creating a virtual museum, Kresy-Siberia. I hope it becomes an important source of knowledge about our history for young people all over the world. I hope it becomes a partnership between Poland and its diaspora abroad. I have instructed Polish consulates and embassies to help in gathering the documentation and the artifacts for the museum. I hope the museum thrives, and I hope you get as many of these artifacts and as many hits on your pages as possible. Good luck.
Thank you, Louise. Now, does anybody know who that was? I should ask John, of course, because he's the honorary consul. That's Radosław Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland. And we've had tremendous cooperation from all the consulates in the different cities where we have these events, and they're helping to gather these materials for the museum. So we're very honored that the Polish government has actually helped us tremendously with the museum in terms of grants as well as support like the consulates.
Can I say just on that, Stephen, that it's also worth with that cooperation remembering that we're talking about Polish embassy in Russia and other places, so that they have offered their cooperation if you're trying to get documents and that sort of thing in relation to your family, that it's very useful to go through the Polish embassy in that country.
Could be Ukraine or Belarus, Lithuania, Kazakhstan.
If you go through them, you get a lot better response if you're looking for something.
And they can also do research for free because they have the intergovernment agreements. So, and again, we can help you if you want, if you're interested in that. And if you join the group, you'll get that information. Aniela, did you want to add something to this?
Yes, talking about embassies, I had great help from the Iranian Polish embassy in Iran, but nothing from Uzbekistan. I've tried millions of times, emails, phoning. I just wonder if something could be done through that to kind of get them.
Yes, let's see if we can cut through that a little bit.
Yes,
Maybe we can talk to our friend, Minister Sikorski.
Don't respond at all. And there's a Polish community in there, and I'm sure they would have some information, but they just don't respond.
Okay. Let's see if we can do something together to help on that one. So, Louise, can we click ahead to the museum galleries? Okay, let's stop on that one. I mentioned that we have these galleries. There's 29 of them, and we've done 8 and opened them. That doesn't mean that they're 100% finished, but we still have 21 more to do. So I won't give you the whole list of 29, but just to give you the idea, the one we start with is the historical Kresy. And that's because these eastern lands have always been lands of shifting battles and populations. It was where the Turks were attacking Western Europe, if you want, with Eastern civilization. The Tatars, the Mongols, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Cossacks shifting back and forth. And so the history goes back thousands of years. The word Kresy has lots of translations. People usually say borderlands. I call it frontierlands, which sounds the same, but think of the Wild West in the US or something like that. There were lines of castles that were put up and defenses and so on. So we give a bit of a background as to why these lands have such a mixture of people, and always did. Then we have, the next gallery is Kresy between the wars, 1918 to 39. So you can see that's 21 years, maybe 20 years. It's a short time. It's one generation almost for the country to exist. And we talk about how the country tried, the experiences that it had. In this time frame is also the Soviet-Polish War, or the Bolshevik-Polish War, which was when we had what we call the miracle on the Wisła. That's because the Soviet troops had pushed all the way up to Warsaw. And with a much smaller band, the Poles thought they would be defeated. And they managed to defeat the Soviets and push the boundaries all the way back to the eastern line of Poland, past Lvov. They went even as far as Kyiv. And it was called the miracle of the Wisła. It also made Stalin very angry because he was one of the young lieutenants who was beaten during this. And so when he had a chance to get back at the veterans, who by the way were being awarded land after the 1920 22 Riga Treaty that said, okay, this is going to be the boundary. Then the Polish government said, well, maybe we should put some of these veterans and give them settlements, osady, colonies, if you want, through these lands, both as a reward for their service, but also to start having a little bit of a buffer against the Soviets for the future. So these were the very first people to be deported as soon as the Soviets came in, the osadnicy, or the settlers. So that's the history we talk about there. Then we have the German and Soviet invasion. And the thing that's most important for us to teach the world there, I think, is that Hitler and Stalin were partners. They weren't enemies, they were partners, and they divided Poland up between them in a coordinated plan, in a secret protocol. And it surprised the Poles completely. They were busy fighting the Germans, and in their backs they got stabbed by the Russians. So this is something that's not really known or understood. And so we explain that in this one. The Soviet deportations at the beginning of 1940. This is when my father was deported, February 10th. I think Basha, that poem by Tadek Sobierajski mentioned the 10th of February. This is the first one. Very, very cold, sent up to Archangel. Then there were 3 other mass deportations in April and June, and 1941 also in June. Katyn massacre. So this was in 1940. And it has its own gallery. Now each of these galleries is prepared by historians, is professionally reviewed. There's film clips, there's photographs, there's historians' explanations, because we're trying to explain this history for people who maybe have never heard it or never heard all the different elements. So that's the Katyn massacre, which I'm sure that most people here are very familiar with this by now. After the Germans attacked in June 1941, the Russians, the partnership was finished, and Stalin needed help. He said to Churchill, well, why don't we have a common enemy now, which is Hitler. He's attacked us, he's attacking you, let's join forces. And Churchill said, okay, but you have to let the Polish people go. So all of these Polish people, the ones who were deported, the prisoners of war, the officers that people didn't know they had been murdered at Katyn, they thought they were still being held prisoners somewhere. All of the Polish people were given an amnesty. Again, whether they were Polish Catholic, Jewish, doesn't matter, Ukrainians, they were Polish citizens from before the war. They were all released. And they made their way to form Anders' army under General Władysław Anders, the Polish army in Russia, which was meant to be used to fight Hitler. This was a very deadly time. You might think, well, they've been released, that's good news. Well, yes, but they were released to their own devices. There was already war in the Soviet Union, and they said, you can leave the camp if you want, but we're not going to give you any food, we're not going to give you any transport, and good luck going 3,000 kilometers or however far you have to go across the huge Soviet territory. So many, many Polish people actually died after they were released. Of course, there were some who were never told about the release, so they just stayed in the labor camps. Some of them were even in labor camps until the 50s. And they weren't told that the war was over, believe it or not, in some of these remote areas, because the Soviets needed them for their labor. But we have this gallery about that part of the history. Maybe I'll just mention very briefly, it's a very personal part for me because my grandfather died after they were released, because they were making their way south. It was January 1942, very cold. You heard in the movie when they were saying the train would stop, and then they had to go find food, and then the train would start without warning, and people would be left. Well, this happened to my grandfather. He was 48. He went to find some food. He had a hot kettle with some soup in it, and the train left, and he wasn't able to catch up to it. So we caught the next train. Winter blizzards, the train's locked, but he's holding on to the outside, on the steps, through the blizzards. And his gloves are wet, they're frozen. He's holding on to the soup because he has to take it back to the family. And he catches frostbite in his hands. And the frostbite isn't treated. There's no doctors. They don't amputate it. But it gets gangrene and then blood poison, and then he dies. He reaches the family, and then he dies with the family. We don't know where he's buried, or there's no trace of him. So this is just my personal sort of element of this gallery. happened to my grandfather. And we have, I mentioned the New Zealand gallery, there's the one on India is already open, and the one on Africa is open. So the ones that we don't have yet, and I'd like to maybe talk to some people today while we're here and also when we go to Wellington, is how do we do the New Zealand gallery? It would be great to be maybe doing some in cooperation with the Heritage Trust Museum and the Paeatua Museum. There have been so much gathered here in New Zealand, movies, books, information, photograph collections. We just wanted to cooperate to take it to the world. New Zealand knows all about this here, or your people of the generation, David, as you said. But we think that the New Zealand story is really important, even if it was only 783
and 105 adults.
Right, so 838 Polish people altogether. That doesn't sound like much compared to millions, but it was such an important story, I think, to share with also people in Poland and people everywhere around the world. So that's one of the galleries we want to open. One of the galleries we need to open is the Battle of Britain. As you might know, the best fighter squadron in the Battle of Britain was 303 Squadron. Louise, do you want to add anything about the Polish Air Force, just from your part of that whole group? I'll just give you a moment to add.
Only very briefly, I mean, there's also a group called 300 Polish Squadron, which is not just dedicated to the 300 Polish Squadron, but all the Polish squadrons. And I'm a member of that group also because my father, after he went through the Middle East, joined the Polish Air Force and then trained in the Bomber Command. So that's a group for people who are particularly interested in the Polish Air Force, but it's kind of a, another group that's associated with Kresy.
Thanks, Louise. The point that I actually wanted to add to this is, even though the group is called Kresy-Siberia, sometimes people say, well, my father was from Warsaw, and so even though he was deported, he wasn't from Kresy, so I guess you're not really interested. Or some people say, well, my babcia was in Lvov through the war, and they never deported her to Siberia, so maybe you're not really, that's not in your group, is it? And I actually wanted to just maybe explain that what we're doing is combining these stories. The people who were in eastern Poland, in the frontier lands, in Kresy, all of eastern Poland, whether they were deported or not deported, they stayed during the war, or if they were killed by the Germans when the Germans invaded, or deported to forced labor in Germany, these were still people from Kresy who've lost their land, their homes. And so it doesn't matter if they were deported to Siberia or not. Or some people were deported to Siberia, they came from northern Poland or southern Poland or western Poland, they were in the army and they were captured by the Soviets and deported, or they were refugees and they were deported. So you don't have to come from the Kresy. And then the last group didn't come from the Kresy and they weren't deported to Siberia, but they're the people who were in the Polish forces fighting in exile. And this was like my other grandfather, not the one who died, but the one who survived. He was from Zakopane, which is, as you know, southern Poland, where is the Highlanders, the Górale. He was an Olympic skier, he was an officer in the September campaign, and he escaped across the Romanian border with tens of thousands of other Polish soldiers and with the government, and they went into neutral Romania because they wanted to continue the fight. So we have a gallery also about those who left Poland to continue the fight, and they regrouped in France and Lebanon, 3rd Carpathian Rifles. And in France, the Flyers and the Airmen went there, as well as soldiers, and tried to help defend France against the Germans. The French were allies, they didn't last that long. Then they went to England, and then they based the rest of the war from England. So General Maczek's, the Panzer Division of General Maczek, the 1st Division, the parachutists, the Independent Parachute Brigade, the Polish Navy, all of these histories are included in the Kresy-Siberia Museum, and we have a special gallery for them also. I also just wanted to add about Berling's army. Does anybody know what I'm referring to, the Kościuszko Division, Berling's army? Well, in the Soviet Union, when Anders' army was released, and there was the evacuation to Persia, many Polish people didn't make it. They didn't get there in time, or they weren't released, or they were just stuck in other parts of the Soviet Union. And so afterwards they had a chance to join another army. This one was under the Russian command, not under the British command, under the Russian command. And they actually fought the Germans through Poland and up to Berlin. They helped actually in the defeat of Berlin, and that's called Berling's division. Some families had one brother in the Western Allies forces with Anders or Maciek, some in the Air Force, and one brother maybe was in Berling's army because he ended up another way. So all of these stories are important, and we have a gallery for each of them. The last gallery that we have is called, in English we're calling it Lest We Forget. In Polish we say, jeśli ja o nich zapomnę, to Ty Boże, Ty zapomnij o mnie. I think I have that more or less right. It was by Adam Mickiewicz from Dziady, and he actually wrote this for one of the earlier Russian deportations from 1800s. And it means if I forget about these people, then God, please forget about me. And so what we're saying in this last one is gatherings like this, the work of the PhD Museum, Pominiki and monuments around the world. How are we remembering this now? So these 29 galleries, they're all professionally done. We pay the historians, we pay for photographs, it's all tested and so on. And it starts from 1,000 years ago in the Kresy up to almost the current time. So Louise is telling me, hurry up and move to the next page. This is just a very quick glance of the start of the India gallery. So you can see each one of these has its theme. There's the Taj Mahal, Indian writing, and it'll talk about the experiences of the people who went through India. Aniela, you're going to be in 7 or 8 galleries yourself, so don't be too greedy. We'll have to get your history in all of them. Let's go on. Okay.
Is there something about Karachi in India?
Yes, because Karachi was part of India. Now it's Pakistan, it was India. The second part, so that's enough about the galleries. The second part is the Wall of Names. The Wall of Names is like a monument, a war monument. You can see it's got all of these names. It has about 40,000 names already. But
we don't have the entire part to this. Something to think about.
We might be missing some. But even, can I just say, it's a lot bigger job even than that, because we want to have over 1 million names. If you think about all the people I mentioned who were living in Lvov and Vilna and Baranowice and Grodno and Łódź and all of the places in eastern Poland who had to be moved or who were moved after the war out of their lands, either they were killed or they were deported or they had to be forcibly moved to when they moved borders over. But we do have 40,000, and the ones we have so far are from lists that we've been able to process and find. But part of the work that we have to do is take other lists that sometimes they're just handwritten. So we need to have some people who go through the handwritten list and can type it out. Sometimes it's looking for lists. Sometimes an embassy might have it and we need to get it. And sometimes the names were never written down. So part of what we depend on is people to remember their family, their cousins, or a friend, and to add these names. Because for us, if the name is written down, at least the person is remembered somewhere and recorded and recognized. Okay? So that's what the purpose here is. I want to just show you how it works. Louise, okay. You can see here's the start of the W's. And I just go from WA to WAK, so it goes on for another 30 sort of pages like this, just only of the W's. But when you look at these names, the beauty about the internet is it's more than just a list. You can click on the name, which Louise will do, and it opens up. And then on this name you can add information. Now this guy's my father, Zbigniew Wacław Wiśniowski, and on this here we have a photograph of him at the end of the war, but also where was he born, what was the date, what was his father's name, his mother, her last name, after the war, his wife, Maria Mizhkovich, my mother, and also the children's names are written here. So this is just the beginning. This is something that you can add to. If you find the name, if the name's not there, you can put it on. And you can add information here that we don't have. Life before the war, what was the deportation experience, military service, what was his life after, how did he come to be in Canada, or wherever the history is that they ended up. Just to show you how much you can put, this is our friend Kresy-Siberia from Canada about her mother. And look at how much history she's put in here, and also extra photographs. If you're a grandchild and you want to write a poem or draw a picture, you can add it to this So this is like a tribute to each person to bring their life to memory. It's not just a name, it's a person.
We've got a lot of entries also when people, survivors have written their histories on bits of paper, and we can scan them and add them onto those entries.
Like little memoirs, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the wall of names. So I've talked about the galleries, they're professional. The wall of names, which is where we list the names. And now this is the hall of memories, and these are like little albums. Now I mentioned that we had 1,000 members in Kresy-Siberia. They collected 5,000 or 6,000 photographs. And we said, let's start organizing this in a way that people can find these photographs, either what city it refers to, or what part of the war, how does it relate. So we started gathering these albums here. And Louise, let's zoom in a little bit on the next one. Well, that's right, that was just showing we had over 8,000 of these already. So this is mine. So each of you can have one of these if you join the museum. There's my father. There's the family in Slough, England. My grandmother, the blind uncle I was telling you about, who told me the history. Here's my father's Siberian cross. So as Yannick was saying, anybody who went through this Siberian experience is eligible. So I thought this was important, and I put my father's Siberian cross, and so on. Letters from the embassy in Tehran, because my aunt, 16-year-old, died, and they sent me a picture of her grave. So I put all of this into my album. But the next photograph is particularly important. It'll be a zoom in here. This is the photograph that's now in my collection, but it's not my photograph. What is this photograph? Well, it looks like it's about 15 or 20 guys, one woman, right in the middle. And these people were the leader of my grandfather's settlement. Remember I was saying that the soldiers got these lands and these settlements given by the government. Well, my family wasn't war veterans, but they were civilians. There were also civilian settlements. This settlement was called Warszawka, and in 1928, this was the council that was running Warszawka, the colony council, if you want. And it's the first time I saw a photograph of my grandfather. It's the only photograph I've seen. Lucian Wiśniewski, that's him up in the top corner. And it looks cut off, but if this was on the museum, I could zoom in and it would be all kind of shown. And this photograph actually came from another one of our members, who's Basia Kwietniowska in Toronto, Canada. And it turns out that her father was Tadeusz Kurysz. I think he's this guy. And when she put her photograph in her album, she wrote, well, her father was still alive, is still alive, and he told her who all these people were. And she wrote it down. So this shows how important it is for when we get the photographs from people, say who the people are as much as you can. When Babcha's not here anymore, who knows who these people are? Yes, they look nice, but because Tadeusz was still alive, he told his daughter each of these people. And you see they're all written down. Tadeusz Kurysz, Józef Wicherek, Louis had two sisters, Alexander Kwolek, Gurgacz, and then it says Lucian Wiśniewski. So because Basia went to the trouble to scan the photograph and to have the names written, and the date and the place, I found it. And so it's just an example how by sharing this, different families are finding information maybe they never had about their own family.
I had one the other week where a lady that we interviewed in Brisbane said, and by the way, I just want to add on to the wall of names her two nephews and their father, because they all perished during the war. And I just did a little search and found that in fact one of them had survived the war and gone back to Poland. So now I've sent her that information, so now we're going to see if he's got a long life, which is highly likely because he's over 100, but whether he's got family in Poland. And those things happen all the time. It's amazing how often they do happen.
So that's the Hall of Memories, where we're scanning photographs, or actually people are scanning photographs and submitting them. And you can see it has who, what, when, where, and you can search. So if someone wants to find anything else about Warszawka in our entire collection, they can search on the internet and these photographs will come up. Okay, the very last section. So I've talked about the galleries, the professional 29 galleries, the Wall of Names, and now the Hall of Memories. The last section is the survivor testimonies. And is Olivia still here? Olivia.
It's Olivia.
Olivia is still here?
Yes.
Okay. Olivia is one of the granddaughters who did a documentary film and did some interviews and recorded, I think, maybe her uncle or some additional people. It's very important for us to capture the people talking themselves about their personal experience. It doesn't matter if it's, well, John, I think we've recorded you as well, and some other people have been recorded. We've recorded 661 here. It's actually over 700 now since I've made this slide. 700 interviews around the world. And the reason I mentioned Olivia was because it's not only interviews that we do, because we're also gathering here interviews that were done by other people that might be in personal collections or in other museums or other places. And I just picked on Olivia, or mentioned Olivia, because I know you have a few interviews in your 3-hour documentary. And we'll be talking later on about how Olivia's interviews could be added to this collection. We think it's very important that people can say their experience in their own words. For so many years, the survivors weren't given a voice, or people died, and so there was no one to tell their story to the world. So we think it's very, very important to be gathering as many of these as we can. Has anyone here heard of a guy called Steven Spielberg? Has anyone not heard of Steven Spielberg? Okay. Well, Steven Spielberg has an important project that he's been doing for 20 years, well, 20 years, I think, and he's been recording every Holocaust survivor he can find. Not just him, he's got thousands of people doing it, and they've raised $75 million to record these people. They've recorded about 30,000 people, $75 million. There's a whole building that's put aside in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, University of Southern California, for the Shoah collection. Now, we said, well, if Steven Spielberg can do this for the Holocaust survivors, what about all of the survivors of the Polish? The Gehenna, as we call it, the living hell that they went through. Well, we've got almost 1,000. So we still have a bit of catching up to do, and we don't have much time because the ones that we haven't collected already, they won't be here much longer. So one of the things I want to do today is anyone who's willing to be interviewed, please come talk to us, write down your name on the sheets, or anyone who's willing to make an interview. All you need is a video camera, and it could be in English, it could be in Polish. We like to have it in English if we can, so that the grandchildren can understand, and so the people elsewhere around the world can understand. And what we do, often the interview is 2 hours or maybe longer, we give that interview to the family on the DVD so that they have it to keep and they can share that. But then the second thing that we do is we take some excerpts from the interview. So you can see here's 3 of the same man, Bolesław Wojciechowski. We actually recorded it in Poland. And we have 3 excerpts. Like in the movie, maybe they're talking for 2 minutes about what happened at a particular time. And we take the best 3. And then what we do is we present these so that by picking different ones as you go through, you can get the whole story. Yeah, some of them were in Anders' army, some of them weren't. Some were in Africa, some were in New Zealand. So by having this composite of all of these interviews, people can do extra research, learn the story, or if you're a professional historian, you might be able to access the full interview. And of course the family has the interview. So Louise, we can just maybe go to the next one. I mentioned before Ojciec Królikowski, that's him. We actually recorded Ojciec Królikowski. He's in a wheelchair because he was in Warsaw and broke his leg. And even then he agreed to talk to us about his story. And you can see we have 8 of him because he had some very interesting stories. So we have a long interview, but we took 8 excerpts from Father Królikowski. I think we can probably go on. So just to finish up, I've already mentioned the Republic of Poland. You saw the Foreign Minister, Sikorski. I have to start by saying that the Senate of Poland has given us the most tremendous support because our first grant came from the Senate of Poland in association with Wspólnota Polska, which is the Polish Commonwealth, if you want the association. But the money came from the Senate's budget. And because we're now headquartered in Warsaw, we set up our foundation in Warsaw, we've been able to get more funding from the Polish government for this work. And they're giving us this money both because they see it's important for Poland and also because they see it's an important link to the Polish diaspora, to the Polonia that's outside in all of these countries, because we all came from the same place before the war. We're getting help from the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage as well, because they're helping pay for some of the scanning and the archiving, which all costs money. It's also the National Audiovisual Institute and the Polish History Museum has given us grants too. And then they get to show the exhibit physically. We put it on the internet. Polonia organizations like the SPK, actually SPK New Zealand, has given us a grant. So we're very grateful for that, and good on New Zealand for that. The Polish Airmen Association, Family Settlers, the Association of Poles from India, the Siberian Association of US in Chicago has given us a $1,000 grant. Canadian Polish Congress in Kitchener gave $1,000 in Canada, in Ontario, and in the UK. And we had one government grant outside Poland so far, was the state of Victoria, coming from Melbourne, their Multicultural Commission. So we think we'd like to get more of those if anyone has contacts with governments and things like that as we go. The other thing that, because people never really like to ask for money, but because I'm the president of the foundation, it's my job, so I have to do it. And it's good to have the government grants, but from year to year they can come and they can go. And at the beginning of this year, we didn't have any government grants. We have 5 people we're employing. 1 is in Canada, is our project manager. 4 are in Warsaw. We have a general manager of the foundation there, 2 archivists and an IT person. And also we have an IT contract with a company that helps us build the internet design. We had to let 3 of those people go in January, which is very difficult for us because it's a small group and there's so much work to do. But we didn't have any grants. So even though this is so important to have these assistances, it's also very important for individuals to donate if they can. And if we can just go to the next page, Louise, it's the last page. So that's why we're here, asking for your support and contribution and participation in this story. Even though we have all these volunteers, Louise doesn't get paid anything, I don't get paid anything. But some things do cost money. Computers costs money. If you have a computer at home, you know that, and you have to pay for the internet and all of that. Sometimes we have to pay for the photographs. If we get something from the Karta archive or some other places in Poland, we have to pay money, $20, $30 for a photograph, $100. We have to pay historians because they have to live too, and if they're writing a historical explanation or something, we have to pay them. There's some travel costs as we go around to interview people. And there's administrative costs. Because we set up the foundation in Poland, it has to be audited. We have to report, so there's lawyers' fees, accountants. It's the usual stuff. So today, on the little green sheet that you have, it's asking for, one of the categories is if you have any money that you would be willing to contribute, we would be very grateful. Because as you can see, we've made a good start, but we still have a lot of work to do. We're also asking for interviews. If somebody has gone through this experience and is willing to be interviewed, please, this is the time to do it. Don't put it off another year or 2 years or 3 years. We're already starting late. And we would love to have access to the New Zealand interviews, even some that were done 20 years ago or something, when the memories were fresher for people. And if you're able to do an interview, like be the interviewer, we need those people too. And share your photos and documents. A lot of people have albums that they have. So like Aniela, that beautiful album that you brought, if you would be willing to share that with the rest of the world, or some of it, and we can scan some of those pictures and put them on the museum, there's a place for it there. And I'm just saying you, but there's other albums, I'm sure, in all of the families that you have. And one of the saddest things for us is when we hear that the survivor has died, and there's a box found in the attic or something with the photographs and documents, and the kids come to clean up afterwards and say, well, what are we going to do with this? Maybe they give it to the PHT museum, I don't know. In some places it just goes into the rubbish, and all those memories are lost. So that's, for us, that's a tragedy. So if you're a kid and you know how to run computers, help your grandma scan the photos now, and to tell you who's the people on the photos, because you might be helping somebody else find out about their family. So we ask you to, open your wallets a little crack if you can, and help us today. There's no cost for this presentation, but if you're able to, we will take credit card donations or by check. John, I don't think we have an account in New Zealand yet, but it would be great to have one, or maybe we could talk with Polish Heritage Trust if we can do some kind of a cooperation. But we do have an account in Australia. And Louise, did our forms put the Australian account or the Polish account? The Australian account. So we have an Australian account that you can transfer money to, or I know, Barbara, you were talking about if there was enough here being gathered, we can open up a New Zealand account as well. We've got accounts and divisions in Canada, US, UK, Australia already, and Poland, of course. Maybe there should be one in New Zealand too. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means. Otherwise, that's the end of my sort of spiel for you today. Our objective was to meet you, talk to you, tell you what we're doing, and to invite any kind of cooperation. We're not here to tell you your story. We want to hear your story and take it to the world. Okay? Thank you very much. Oh, and sorry, does everybody have, if you don't have a form or a pen, I think that Kelly still has some forms at the door and might even have some pens. Yes?
Is there any reason why you go back to the old flag? You know, when you're not using red and white, it's on the flag.
Well, the flag was always red and white, but the government flag had an eagle on it, you know, like it was the ensign. And they still use that for government buildings. Do you want to say? Just a moment. I think I'll just ask Ellen to say a few words at the end as our host here, for whom we're again very, very grateful to the museum, to Ellen, and to the honorary consul, Kelly, and all of you for helping. Aniela, thank you. And Jackie and Martin, thank you all. And Ellen, thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan and Louise, for coming today. I'd like to personally thank my father, John Wojciechowski, for his wonderful work that he does at the Polish Heritage Trust Museum, and of course Stefan and Louise with their virtual museum. Just a couple of things, if you could sign the visitor's book, we'd absolutely love it if you would today, please. Kelly's got that just over there by the table. We are just going to rinse out a few cups and then while it's another cup of tea, but we'll put that on shortly, so don't feel like you have to rush away. We're here for as long as you want to stay this afternoon. Another announcement we've got to make is on the 13th of May, which is Mother's Day Sunday, 11 o'clock, Television 1, program called Neighbourhood. Polish Heritage Trust Museum will have a segment in that television program. As far as we know, it's airing on the 13th of May, so we do hope you have a chance to see that. It's a little story about the Kaiatua children, and it will be absolutely wonderful. We've got one of the gentlemen here who's part of that film today. I think he's here. He was here. He had to go. So look, I do hope you have a chance to watch
Sunday 13th at 11 a.m. TV1.
Program called Neighbourhood, so don't miss it.
Worthwhile.
Yes, that's really exciting. So look, stay for a cup of tea if you want to, and have a wander. I'll open the other gallery if anyone wants to go upstairs to have tea. The main museum upstairs.
And if you know anyone in Wellington, we're in Wellington tomorrow at the, where are we, Louise? In Wellington? Where are we in Wellington?